So
All
I'm
right,
just going to,
hang on. So welcome everybody. This is Tuesday, October 3rd, a weekly SIG testing meeting. This is being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube shortly. We're going to kick off with a demo of Scanner from Heptio by Timothy St. Clair.
I'm just going to hand it off actually to Chuck, but
All right,
to give a brief overview, we've been involved with the upstream or sort of the CNCF conformance effort. And as a part of our own efforts for us to be able to qualify people who sort of have a Kubernetes distribution already in their environment, we needed some tooling to be able to give a green-red signal about what we were evaluating. So with that preface, I'll hand it over to Chuck.
Hey everyone, I'm Chuck. I work with Tim at Heptio, and we've developed the program Sonoboy. I think there was a demo a little while ago, but to give a recap of what that is, like Tim said, it's a way to qualify your cluster and run conformance tests after you stand up your cluster and see if it's passing all of the conformance tests. And when we first released it, it was just a command line, not even a command line app. It was just a GitHub repo with some YAML that you could install in your cluster, and you could get a tarball with some stuff inside of it. But we've since put a user interface on top of it, and that's the demo I'm going to show you right now. Okay. So let's go to the home page, which is scanner.heptio.com. And it gives you a little preamble and a little bit about what to expect. And you can go ahead and click scan your cluster. It'll bring you to a page where it gives you an ID. And it gives you a kube control apply command that you can grab. And then you paste it into your cluster like that. And that'll spin up a bunch of stuff that goes and runs. And this is going to take a while, so I won't make you wait for up to 30 minutes for these tests to finish. But we've got a run. Yeah, you can see that this page automatically updates, and when your tests finish, it'll forward you to the results. But if you want to see what a result looks like, here is a results page. You get a list of conformance tests that have run, and everything passed except for this failure here. You can click into it and you can drill down and you can see, okay, this is the actual test that was run and what happened. And then it pulls out the system logs for a given failure. So hopefully a way to see what actually went wrong. You can delete your report and you can download your test report. So you get the logs and the XML file that gets generated. That's pretty much the entirety of this demo.
cool. This looks really interesting. I'm assuming this means that your cluster needs to have inbound and outbound internet access.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And this has to be run as a user, as an admin user as well.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for that demo, Chuck and Tim. Okay, so we were going to have a sort of a discussion on what a status page might look like, but just given the volume of other things here, I was wondering if we were okay with moving to what we need to do on this pull request that Philip, or I don't know how to pronounce the name here, this pull request on integration test plan for apps. I've raised this a couple times now. And it seems like we'd like to see if there's an overlap of effort here, or if we are comfortable letting this go forward and iterating on it. And so, Maru, I know you're here. You have some opinions. I personally am like leaning in the direction of, like, if this is work that somebody's willing to do, I don't really want to oppose it. I just want to maybe better understand if we think it's going to get in the way of any other ongoing work we'd like to do. So what do we feel like remains to be done here?
As per my comment, I think that the setup should not be done in Bash. I think integration testing by and large is better suited to doing things in code where you can configure it, where you can swap components out, using interfaces, that kind of thing. So I think to me that's the major thing, and the secondary thing that's not as big, but I think that fixture should just be common. It shouldn't be, oh, this is apps only. It should be discoverable like in a common path. And then we can iterate it on there. But I'd like those sort of preconditions to be met before we merge it. And then we can evolve it. I definitely think there's room for sharing infrastructure, like the workaround doing Docker and Docker for integration testing could probably use a lot of that or extend from it. So I think it's a really good start. I haven't really, I guess my thoughts weren't really clarified until I sort of looked over it. I've been kind of meaning to comment for a while, and I just finally, that's my thinking. So I'm curious what other people think about that.
Can you give a TLDR? I'm just drive-bying on this. What exactly it means to be, for what apps is referring to in this? Because there's so many overloaded terms in the
SIG
Kubernetes.
apps, so deployment, replica sets, all the ways that you run apps on a cluster. I don't know.
But are you talking core constructs or the actual applications themselves?
Core constructs. So I linked the PR in the chat. And Dilip, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly or if I'm even saying the right name, but feel free to jump in here if I'm misstating things. Like the description of the PR sort of says, you know, we want to test basically the workload controllers and different layers. So let's talk about pods, nodes, making sure those work correctly, then go a level up from there and look at things like services and volumes, and then a level up from there. Let's look at the controllers around workload constructs like replica sets, daemon sets, cron jobs, those sorts of things.
But I mean, what he's implemented is basically spin up a control plane, spin up some hollow nodes, and then run the tests against that. And so it's basically like it's a test cluster, and it's not fully functional. It doesn't actually run anything. It doesn't actually like run containers or use Docker, which is good for their purposes. I'm just concerned that it's just yet another way to spin up a cluster, as if we don't have enough of those already. And I think for integration testing,
why wouldn't they just use integration and E2E? It seems like there's a scaled model here for partial integration and partial E2E.
the problem is that there's been a gap in integration fixture, and that gap remains unfilled. There's no canonical way to start a master that's actually clean and representative of what you'd actually deploy. There's some, run a master nonsense, but as I linked to in my comment, like Dr. Stefan has an example of how to do an API server properly. You need to extend the work he did to do the other components of the control plane so you can spin them up trivially without having to know all the details, which you kind of need to do now.
There's definitely framework GUI and integration tests for how the master is spun up, and it's not a standard master.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So there's an example for API server testing of how to do it properly, and we need to I have it on a to-do to like extract that from the API server path and actually move it as integration framework, and we can then, like I said, use that example to target the other components that we need to run integration testing.
Right. So to kind of reframe in the context of what tripped us up the first time this discussion came up is, this idea of improving the fidelity of our integration tests, because we as SIG testing as a group hate E2E tests. They're slow, they're flaky, they're unreliable, they don't provide great signal. We'd rather stuff that's faster. And so integration tests seem like they could be a good mixture, a good middle level between unit and E2E. On the other hand, we could try an approach where we bring up a lower fidelity cluster. Quentin, we tried this in the past with a Docker and Docker-based cluster, and this is basically an attempt to do that with a real control plane, but hollow nodes. And if we could take the existing E2Es and point them at a lower fidelity cluster, would that give us, faster signal in that way? I view these as two parallel things that eventually one of those efforts will probably prove more fruitful than the other, but I would be willing to see that proceed if we don't think those are necessarily going to clash over top of each other. But if we think that's actually going to impede work one direction or another, maybe we should choose one now. But to me, it seems a little early to make that determination.
I think they're both useful. I mean, my goal isn't to say don't do this at all. It's more there's some common stuff there, like being able to, from code, spin up a control plane. That could be used for both a Docker and Docker node and a hollow node cluster. So I want to sort of set him on the road of collaborating rather than just doing something that's very app specific. And I don't think it's a lot of work to take what he's done and do that.
Thank you for picking this up in the AppSig agenda today. I've been using Docker and Docker for quite a long time. One of the problems that I feel, I mean, as a matter of fact, I've used the Docker and Docker from kubeadmin version. So one of the problem I often run into is uh, that the setup itself is not really stable. Sometimes you end up having the cluster being really flaky when you're trying to bring it up, especially when it's a new build. So, I mean, because it's a Debian and we don't have enough budget to actually stand up a real cluster. We have to deal with Docker and stuff. But then I thought this one is really clean. You actually start up real control plane without faking any of that. I started with starting these control plane inside the code, like starting the API server within the code. But then the code itself might be changing. I mean, you're using REST, and then in future you might be using a different protocol. So why not start the actual API server? Why not start the actual scheduler? Why not start the actual control manager?
Well, actually, we can do that. You just don't have to do it from CLI. It's possible to start the actual component, but do it from code. And as I said, the example I linked to in my comment points to how to do it for the API server, and that's written by the guy one of the maintainers of the API server. And this is how they're intending to do their testing. So I don't think I can't do it correctly.
There was one small little reason which I thought that we might be able to start just using the binary is because, if there is an error maybe there is an error in your code and you want to further investigate it after the test is completed, then you would actually leave this dummy cluster up and running, and you could actually point your CLI to this dummy cluster and continue your investigation. But if
you always have the option of debugging it. I mean, the danger is if you go too far with, I'm going to run a cluster and it's going to be like debuggable, like after the fact, then you have a lot of complexity involved. Whereas you can use a Delve debugger on an in-process component like the API server and actually hone in on what the problem is. And to me, that's an advantage of doing something integration versus I'm end to end and I have this whole cluster that I have to worry about.
Okay, I mean that was the only reason I thought we should go ahead with the actual binaries, because you might be able to investigate it.
I mean, something that we talked about, and I don't think you were involved in that discussion, but when we were talking about sort of how to go forward with integration testing, we were talking about being able to actually write tests that could target real clusters or fake clusters. And I think the tests that you're imagining for apps that can, they can target this test cluster, they could just as easily target a real cluster. And my goal would be enabling, cheap, fast integration fixture. We would run that most of the time, but then you'd be able to run that test against a real cluster, whether it be Docker and Docker based or actual like physical node based. And so you kind of get the best of all worlds. And the way you do that is separating the test fixture or the test setup from the test execution. As long as that separation is maintained, you have a lot more options, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm trying to just set this in chat, like what I'm trying to understand, it sounds like there is a way we can collaborate here. What I want to understand is what's the point at which we feel like we're ready to start iterating on what you two are talking about? Like, because this has been proposed and been hanging out and blocked for a while, and I would like to make sure we can actually start moving forward on it.
I don't think there's anything blocking it. Like I said, my two suggestions, I'd like to see us make the fixture more generic, not so app specific. And that's just providing a little bit of separation between the test and the fixture involved, and focusing on launching components from code. And it may be that launching from components from code is a longer term effort. If that's the case, then I'm not saying I want to block in it. I just don't really want us to go down the road of more bash, because that seems to be just like a rat's nest. It's really hard to maintain bash fixture versus doing it in code. So.
We already have a number of fixtures already, so there isn't anything new here that isn't covered by the existing fixtures, other than they could be cleaned, more clean.
It's kind of not true. I mean, we don't have nodes. The concept of nodes doesn't really exist. So even just simply having a wrapper and an easy way of instantiating hollow nodes to target your
There is the performance tests have wrappers for hollow nodes.
Right, but I'm saying nothing that is like generically reusable in integration tests. So
Sure. This goes back to my like conversation piece for like months ago, which I have no time to execute on, which is like we should start making reusable libraries for the tiered structure of the testing.
Yeah,
right,
and
but
this
that's
is
what I'm
why
saying.
like
This is what we're trying to do here. That's the effort involved.
Oh
so
yeah.
I think what I'm hearing is there is an issue that needs to be made for this broader ideal of higher fidelity fixtures and more reusable fixtures that can be done as a follow-on effort to this. And we could either say we would prefer that this PR not be merged until we take a good hard look at what fixtures are being done in Bash that could instead be done with the integration fixtures, or we could merge it as is and say the very next follow-on PR should be work to get rid of the Bash and go forward.
I would Mac that because like we have so much legacy of people doing one-offs and we maintain it forever. It's such a high cost because we have so much stuff in the code that's like that. You look at the entire kube directory.
And I get that. What I think I'm hearing from Dilip, and please correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name, like, is that you're willing to dedicate some time to this. Like, this is a continuous thing you want to focus on in the V19 cycle.
Yes, I mean, the original proposal was to bring this framework for apps, especially for 1.8, but because we couldn't get this moving forward in 1.8, I thought at least we'll get this done by 1.9. And the reason we have laid up the test in such a way is that in the future, if there is something that is breaking, we would know which layer is causing that breaking. So it would be easier for us to run a test in that layered fashion, especially for integration. That was the whole idea. Now I will have to rethink if it has to be a generic test that involves like a whole lot of other components, because I've never thought through things like networks. I don't think the Hollow nodes are capable of handling any network-related test. Or
No, I mean nothing. The hollow nodes, you don't anything it doesn't do. We're not talking about extending hollow nodes to fake other things. I mean, if you need networking, use Docker, and Docker are real nodes. It's more that like as you've implemented, it looks like a very app-specific thing. And I'm not asking for a huge amount of rework. I'm just like, okay, take what you've done, separate the testing from the fixture so that we can iterate on the fixture and make it more reusable for other things. And as far as like, you're concerned, Tam, about this being another legacy thing as soon as it hits the tree, like I want to work on this. I mean, I'm kind of embroiled in moving Federation out of tree, but I mean, as soon as that's done, my focus is on enhancing Federation testing, which includes like basically doing a lot of integration fixture work, making sure that we can do exactly what he's doing, but in a general way and reuse it in Federation. So even if it languishes for a short period, if for some reason he gets pulled away, I'm committed to maintaining it going forward.
Okay, sounds like we've got enough to follow up offline, but I would like to see us revisit this briefly next week because I think, there are people motivated to work on this. Let's make sure it doesn't stay in limbo. We have a whole 1.9 cycle ahead of us.
So I'll just commit to like iterating on that, at least from a testing perspective. So I'm pronouncing your name right, Dilip?
Dilip, yeah, right.
Yeah,
right, cool.
okay. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me directly if you don't get immediate response in the PR and SIG testing. As you can see, Maru and
Yeah, will do.
we won't keep blocking you, or I won't anyway.
Okay. So I'll rewrite the basic fixture to a reasonable level and ping you back sometime this week.
Great, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve, for checking this again.
Yeah, no worries. Matt, do you think you've got sufficient time to demo the awesome stuff you've been doing with Bazel, Rules, Kates, and the Prow stuff?
Yeah, but this is my first time screen sharing on Zoom, so bear with me. Let's see. All right. Looks like I have to select a window at a time. So can you guys see GitHub here?
Yes, big green button.
All right, yeah, well, this is me PRing against my own repo. So I've been playing around with my own environment of Prow. Part of that was, I wanted to go through the motions of setting it up because I'm thinking about running it against a bunch of other repos like the rules, Kates, rules Docker, etc. And once I had Prow in a state where I could stand it up with some of this workflow stuff, I wanted to try it out. So I spent a little while putting together a Buildifier plugin this weekend, basically to test it out. So this is basically just like the GoLint plugin. And in a second or so, you can see it comes back with this Bazel file needs formatting. All right, so if I switch windows here, can you see what looks like a terminal?
I see white. All white.
Okay, let me see if I can make it bigger. Do you see?
I see your cursor, but nothing behind that, unless it's just me. I think maybe you need to select another window in the screen share.
Yeah, let me see how I do that. This is going to be annoying. I usually just share my...
You should be able to share the desktop too.
Oh, yeah. Here, let me just do that. Otherwise, I'm going to have to record. Okay, there we go. Desktop share. Okay, so can you see this window now?
Happy terminal.
Yeah, okay. So this is just, so this is a clone of the test info repo, and I have a bunch of modifications. One is moving the images over to using GoImage to turn them into Docker images, and then building on top of that, I have, let's see, Prow cluster. I split up the starter.yaml that someone wonderfully put together into individual files, and just move this thing out of my way. Wrap them in the Kubernetes rules to allow me to deploy things. And there's a bunch of little logical groupings in here, but at the top you'll see some config maps for config and plugins. You'll see there's some goo in here that could probably be cleaned up a little bit to map image names to the build targets, deployments, etc. So all the objects that were in starter.yaml have a rule that puts them into Bazel land, and then we have these objects things that group together some logical things, and then ultimately at the bottom there's an everything target that effectively reconstructs starter.yaml. And so the reason it's broken apart like this is mostly so that, so I can use everything to run everything.apply to stand up the cluster if it's not there. Or if I want to iterate on individual components, I can say something like hook deployment.replace. And that will rebuild the images with any changes I have, republish them to the registry, and kubectl replace, in this case, that particular deployment. So let's see. Okay, so we saw the Buildifier output. I have a little change just to show this in action, where if I say kube stash, git stash apply, that basically just puts a little high SIG testing in here. And so if I run replace, like I said, this is going to rebuild the Go image, republish it to the registry, and redeploy that thing to my environment. You can see it's already here up and running. And so if I go over here and I Buildify, this is like the longest part, waiting for waiting for this thing to run Buildifier. Let's see. You can see it has high SIG testing in it. So basically, I put together some of the rules Kubernetes stuff to make it so that you could basically have one command you could run to do really fast development iteration against a dev environment on your cluster to rebuild, republish images. It can do multiple images if you needed to do it, and do it really, really fast. And that's the gist of it. So I use this to build the whole Buildifier thing this weekend, and it made me really happy. So, so I like it. If you want to try it out, I'll probably be breaking off pieces of this to send you guys some PRs. The Buildifier plugin needs unit tests and stuff like that. But I was showing this to Eric yesterday, and he suggested I show you guys. So hopefully I can send some PRs to put some of this stuff in your guys' hands soon. But feel free to try out the Bazel rules K8s stuff and send me all of your issues.
Cool. If we want to try this stuff out, where would we go look? Is this in your fork of test info right now?
Yeah, so there's three branches on my fork of test infra, I believe. One creates the starter directory and applies the rule K8s stuff to it. I think the next branch has my changes to the configuration to run certain plugins and stuff, because the vanilla thing doesn't have any, well, I think it has like the size plugin or something enabled, but I wanted more stuff. And then the third is adding all the Buildifier stuff. So, so yeah, you can check it out there. The rules K8s stuff is under github.com, Bazel build rules K8s.
So Matt, I had a quick question. With the Bazel builds for the images, is there still a manifest, like a Docker file that's in the repo for people that aren't using Bazel to build those images?
There is not. I haven't done anything to add Docker file support in there. One of the problems is that you know, the way Dockerfile builds or Docker files are built, it does not play very nice with Bazel's assumptions about reproducibility, because it's going to produce something slightly different every time. You could probably put together, so I don't have a rule that will build a Docker file. You could put together a general that produces a Docker file, and I think in place of one of the targets that would normally reference a Docker build rule, you could probably just put a Docker save style tarball. I haven't tried that, but the Docker build rules support that as a base image, and so I think that should work. If not, you can put it through sort of an empty Docker build rule and feed that into it, and that should work. But if you want to try that out, I'm definitely happy to answer questions.
We might look at it. I think the Bazel stuff and the incremental build sounds really awesome for quick iteration, but for members of the community that aren't using Bazel, just making sure it's still clear how these components are built might be important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're right now at the point where Bazel's not necessarily the de facto way, right?
Yeah. Just moving forward, like with.
Yeah. So I definitely hear that. Yeah.
Is that going to change, or is that we're going to just support non-Bazel forever?
I would imagine that will change eventually. I think Ben has been doing some awesome stuff with Planter to make Bazel a friendlier cross-platform experience, and tends to work better for test infra than it does for Kubernetes.
There's a lot of people pouring effort into this, so I imagine over time it'll probably approach some resemblance of the grand unified theory of builds for the Kubernetes ecosystem.
Is there a proposal for that grand unified theory?
I do not know. That's a good question, but I know that it's being worked on many fronts to get it ready for prime time.
Sounds super useful. I'm excited to have it be the thing, but it doesn't sound like it's there yet.
For KK, it's still kind of a large thing. But seriously, Planter is awesome. I'm a total Bazel noob, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. It's been pretty helpful for me to get my toes wet in that. Let's see. We're kind of over time as usual, but real quickly, Maru, you had a question about what process new repos should use for managing merges. If I had to guess, if you give us like a week or two, we would say the answer is Tide. But
So, I mean, brief backstory on this is we have a few repos coming out of Federation or coming out of KK and becoming their own repos. And I'm kind of like, okay, so how are we going to actually make sure that the tests run and you don't merge until the tests pass? And is the answer just enable submit queue, or do we just make sure the tests pass and then we can hit the green button? I don't really know if there's just docs on this. I'm happy to just be pointed at that, but
I'm not sure that test infra per se has welcome to test infra. Here's our stack. Here's how you consume it. Here's how you use all of it thing. So that's something we might be able to talk through more effectively on the Slack channel. But I think in the interim, if you're just looking for, can I make sure that the tests have actually passed, you could, you or somebody who has the appropriate rights on the Kubernetes organization could set up protected branches on those repos to make sure that like the branches cannot be merged by a human being until certain required contexts pass, right? And that would be relatively easy to get up and running with Prow to actually populate those contexts, and then the human not being able to click the button until they need to. If you want to go the extra step of using a submit queue, you can, but like I said, if you can wait like a week or two, we feel that Tide is very, very close. We've basically turned Tide on for the testing for a repo. And so we're just sort of dog fooding it to make sure that it's working before we open it up to the general public. If you'd like, you can certainly be a guinea pig for how do we use Tide on multiple repos at the same time as well. But it might be a slightly bumpy ride for the next week or two.
Yeah, Tide's been running fine on test infra for a few days now. So we'll be ready to let someone else give it a try pretty soon.
Okay, I think
there's no front end for it right now, which is the main downside.
I think that's fine initially. I think we'd be happy to dog food that if and when you feel it's ready.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, cool. Well, I think that's all that we've got time for today. I appreciate everybody's time as always, and look forward to seeing y'all next week. Happy Tuesday.